Hello, this is Scott Bacino, editor of Telecoms.com here at Network X 2022. I'm delighted to be joined by my esteemed colleague, Evan Kirchheimer. Is that how I pronounce your surname?
Yeah, you can say Kirchheimer, you can say Kirchheimer. I'm easy. With a name like that, I have to be easy.
Well, indeed, I've got a bit of a weird surname.
Yeah, is it Bacino or Bacino?
Yeah, Bacino. Yeah. And Evan, you work at Omdia?
I do.
Which is an analyst firm, which is part of the same stable as Telecoms.com.
I have.
Yeah, I've stumbled across it once or twice. And you've been doing analyst-y stuff at the event, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been doing some analyst-y stuff.
So what have you been chatting about?
Well, I've been talking about hyperscalers and telcos and their relationship. And kind of potential models for them working together, and not just in terms of delivering efficiencies for telcos who, transform their OSS or BSS with sort of cloud-based solutions, but also, are there really any incremental revenue opportunities available or new business models that are enabled by working with hyperscalers? And then whether some of what the hyperscalers promise is actually going to come to fruition.
Right, and what conclusions have you come to?
Well, I know you're going to get me on record here. So there's a little debate in the analyst community. I tend to be a bit of a skeptic. And so my view is that telcos are either going to be kind of lean, light, or local. And lean is mostly the utility model.
Yeah.
Light is a kind of cloud-enabled model in which you can deploy new solutions or services with less CapEx because you're relying on, obviously, AWS or Azure infrastructure or GCP. And then local is where you really focus on access and customer experience and managed services. And it could be not necessarily a telco, right? You could be an altnet. You could be a hyperscaler yourself who's gone local to provide those services to businesses or consumers. And really, I think the trend of the industry is toward the lean model. So in other words, hyperscalers are selling to telcos to transform themselves. That's the predominant model, resulting in the promise of, not necessarily the fulfillment of, lower OpEx ratios, so OpEx per revenue. And what we see is if you do that, then you can provide that lean environment in order to, if you're growing 2-3% a year, that's okay. You're still able to deliver that shareholder dividend. And let's just call it that you're basically becoming a utility, you're delivering a dividend, your shareholders are happy, the markets are relatively happy, and you're not going to do too much that's very exciting or sexy.
Well, no, but I mean, I'm totally sympathetic with that argument. I think that the cultural challenge it presents, because I mean, we write about this a fair bit, and we certainly chat about it on the Telecoms.com podcast, about how, to what extent are these operators, by getting in bed with the hyperscalers, sort of making themselves almost, we used to talk about like the thin client in computing, just basically being having a billing relationship.
A brand, a customer experience brand is what they would focus on. I think that's definitely a risk.
Yeah. But then just to finish that point, the flip side is if, like this topic came up a lot at a recent other trade show I went to, called Digital Transformation World, obviously about digital transformation. But the way digital transformation's generally packaged up is turning them from a telco to a techco, making all these cliched words like agile and scalable that come into it, and actually enabling them to innovate and produce more products. So there's that tension, as you were alluding to, between, do you just admit that you're basically just a utility, or do you try and be more of a technology company?
With telco to techco, in my view, is that it's not like the hyperscalers are the first to promise that. Right? Before the hyperscalers, there were other kinds of vendors, systems integrators, who also promised to transform telcos, right? I mean, certainly 10, 12 years ago, there was that whole wave, I think McKinsey-inspired wave of, digital such and such and having a digital division, and we all know how that worked out. So it's very easy to think, well, the hyperscalers will really transform me into a techco, when actually all other vendors have failed.
Yeah.
So why will the hyperscalers succeed? And the hyperscalers themselves have a particular interest in perhaps seeing telcos as just another customer vertical.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little, that's the kind of origin of my skepticism, frankly. I mean, the telco to techco model, I mean, we can keep inventing terms, but there are several challenges, and one of which is brand, which people don't talk very much, and attracting skills and staff. The other is simply skills gaps in many countries, and there are not many people. How many developers are there, and can they develop on communications and networking, or are they developing other forms of services which don't rely on those protocols? So I think that we just need to see it in perspective, that this is just the latest wave of suppliers coming along saying, we can really transform you and open up new business models. And I want to see some real proof.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% on that. Just one last thing before we wrap it up. Another sort of editorial angle I often take on these hyperscalers is this apparent handing over of control of your assets to this third party. And, it might seem a little bit hysterical. I talk about a couple of years ago, AWS cutting off this sort of fringe social media platform called Parler. And I don't care about it so much that I care about Parler, just as an illustration of the power that AWS has to just basically remove someone from the internet. I don't think AWS would ever do that to a big telco partner. But what are your thoughts more generally on the desirability of putting so much of your own business stuff in the hands of someone else?
It's a complicated question. I mean, generally, I like to spread risk, right?
Yeah.
So if you have, the idea of telco going with one hyperscaler it's obviously something that we're not seeing. They have multiple relationships with multiple different providers, right? And that's one way to mitigate against that. I don't think a hyperscaler would say cut off a corporate client that's pretty neutral like a telco, because once you do that, you threaten your entire business model and totally destroy trust in your service. But that said, classic of enterprise IT buying is you don't put your eggs in one basket. Yeah.
Cool, brilliant.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks for your time, mate.
Thank you, Mr. Pacino.